The next day, Ginny King had just walked into the company when she noticed everyone looking at her with strange expressions. Ginny furrowed her brows and understood what was happening as she approached her office. Everything in the office had been thrown out, including the only photo of her and Zane Soulsby. Ginny radiated a chilling coldness and said in a stern voice, "Who did this?" Ding! StoryShots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. Everyone in the company was afraid of Ginny, and seeing her angry, no one dared to speak up. "I did." A young girl stepped forward. She had fair skin and was very beautiful, but she was also very arrogant and domineering. She was Grace King. "Who gave you the guts to throw my things out?" Ginny walked over, her presence overwhelming. Grace had always been afraid of her strong-willed sister since childhood, but she seemed to recall something and stopped cowering. She snorted, "Ginny King, I'm telling you, I'm not afraid of you anymore." "What did you say?" Grace smugly stepped on the items on the ground and said proudly, "Grandma gave me your 20% shares. Now I own 39% of the shares. Also, Grandma appointed me as the CEO. However, considering your abilities, I've decided not to fire you. That general manager's office is yours." Hearing this, Ginny's face turned ugly. She knew Grandma would take action but didn't expect her to let Grace trample all over her. "What? I'm giving you a job opportunity, and you're glaring at me?" Grace said. Ginny took a deep breath. "I quit. Anyway, I have 17% of King Group's shares. You have to give me dividends at the end of the year." "Humph, dream on." "Grandma said if you dare to quit, you have to return the shares to us." Grace had a smug look, clearly enjoying the situation. Ginny gritted her teeth, glaring at Grace for a long while before turning and walking towards the general manager's office. Seeing this, Grace became even more smug and pointed at Ginny's assistant. "You there, clean up the trash on the floor. Also, inform Ginny about the meeting." The assistant nodded helplessly. Everyone in the King family knew Grace's nature. The old lady sending her over was a clear insult to Ginny. Or perhaps, she wanted to force Ginny into doing something. At the meeting, Grace boasted about making $100 million in a month. Ginny laughed angrily and said, "Grace King, the company currently has a $200 million deficit. As the CEO, shouldn't you find a way to cover this deficit?" Grace nonchalantly played with her nails. "I'm the CEO, I'm here to give orders. Such matters should be handled by you, the general manager. Also, the downstream factories can't be delayed any longer. Fix it immediately." Ginny said, "I have no way to solve it. If you can't solve it, then resign." "Fine, I'll resign. Before you resign, leave the shares behind." Ginny gritted her teeth, glaring at Grace. She knew the shares were her father's legacy, and she couldn't give them up no matter what. "If you won't leave them, then you have one day to fix the downstream factories. Also, find a way to cover that $200 million deficit immediately." Meeting adjourned. With that, Grace left on her own. Everyone exchanged glances, all looking at Ginny with schadenfreude. Ginny returned to her office, angrily sweeping everything off her desk. She felt her life was full of hardships. Things were not going well at work, and her love life was also in shambles. It felt like the heavens had abandoned her in an instant. After venting for a while, Ginny resignedly sat down, took out her phone, and prepared to call Wadsworth Bear. Although Wadsworth Bear and William Mercer had schemed against her, the factory issues still needed to be resolved by him. Suppressing her disgust, she found his number. Just as she was about to dial, her assistant walked in. "Ms. King, Mr. Six wants to see you." "Mr. Six?" "Tristan Dunn." Ginny was momentarily stunned. She knew about this underworld boss. "Why is he looking for me?" "Not sure." Ginny hesitated for a moment, then said, "Let him wait in the reception room." "Okay." Putting away her phone, Ginny walked into the reception room. The first person she saw was Mr. Six. His appearance was too distinctive, bald, one-eyed. He looked fierce and menacing. Ginny had heard of his reputation, ruthless, vicious, and lecherous. Instinctively, a trace of disgust flashed in her eyes. Mr. Six saw Ginny and smiled. "Ms. King, hello." Ginny sat down and said, "What can I do for you, Mr. Six?" Mr. Six smiled. "I've heard that Wadsworth Bear has been sending people to harass your company's downstream factories. I want to cooperate with you." "Cooperate?" Mr. Six said, as the saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I'll help you deal with Wadsworth Bear's people. Is that all? Mr. Six shrugged, same as I said before, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I'll help you, and in the future, if I need help, you just need to return the favor. Hearing this, Ginny breathed a sigh of relief and took the initiative to walk over and extend her hand. Mr. Six glanced at it but didn't shake her hand. He smiled and said, no need for a handshake. Ms. King, you're still very busy. I'll take my leave now. After saying that, Mr. Six turned and left without looking back. Ginny was somewhat surprised. She was quite confident in her appearance, and the rumored old lecher didn't even want to shake hands with her? More importantly, someone like him, who lived in the underworld, didn't take the opportunity to exploit her? She felt the rumors were a bit exaggerated. This Mr. Six seemed to be quite upright. Having resolved the factory issue, she was in a good mood. However, as she walked out of the reception room, her good mood vanished instantly. Because she saw Grace. Grace was chewing bubblegum, glanced at her, snorted, and walked into the CEO's office. Ginny returned to her office. Just as she was about to sit down, her phone rang. Seeing the caller ID, she frowned slightly. The call was from William Mercer's mother, Millicent Morris. When she was young, Millicent Morris had been quite kind to her. After thinking for a moment, she answered the call. Ms. Morris, is something the matter? Ginny, can you come to the hospital? William has been demanding to see you, saying he won't cooperate with the treatment unless he sees you. Ginny quietly replied, Ms. Morris, I'm already married. I think it would be inappropriate. Please, I'm begging you. Just come and see him once. After that, I promise he won't bother you again. Hearing the pleading tone, Ginny hesitated for a moment and then said, all right, I'll come over now. Thank you, Ginny. When Zane Soulsby arrived at Galaxy KTV, the entrance was already in ruins. Some hostesses and waiters stood to the side, looking on with schadenfreude. Mr. Soulsby, look at this. Jake Davies looked troubled, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. Calculate the damages, I'll pay for it. Hearing this, Jake breathed a sigh of relief and quickly said, Ms. Salazar is inside. Zane walked in. April Salazar was sitting on the sofa, her clothes torn, and her face bruised and battered. When he received Jake's call, Zane rushed over. But what he didn't expect was that April's father had beaten her so severely. Was he even human? Was he still a man? Was he still a father? Zane wasn't good at comforting people. He just sat quietly beside her and handed her a tissue. April took the tissue, wiped her tears, and softly said, thank you. I'll repay the money. It's fine, it's not much. April nodded. Her mouth opened, and a stream of blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. Zane's expression changed slightly. He hurriedly picked her up and ran out. He flagged down a car and headed to the hospital. April's face was pale and weak. I'm fine, don't worry. I've been drinking here for a long time, and my stomach has issues. This time, my dad kicked me in the stomach, causing the bleeding. April tried to calmly reassure Zane, but her trembling body told him she was enduring great pain. Your dad is truly inhuman. Zane said. April nodded and said, when he first started stealing money at home, humanity left him. Zane cursed inwardly but had no solution. Soon, the car stopped by the roadside. Zane carried April into the hospital and handed her over to the nurse. After a series of examinations, it was confirmed that April had a stomach hemorrhage. But thanks to Zane's timely arrival, her life was not in danger. Hearing this, Zane breathed a sigh of relief. He had just sat down when he heard a familiar voice from the adjacent ward. Ginny King. Zane stood up and walked over. On the hospital bed, William was lying with a plaster cast on. Beside him, a beautiful woman looked at him with a face full of affection. On the other side, Ginny sat there. Although her face was expressionless, her eyes sparkled with amusement. Ginny, you don't know how much you bullied him when you were kids. To be honest, as his mother, my heart ached, but this boy just liked being bullied by you. The beautiful woman said. Ginny thought of the past, and the amusement in her eyes overflowed. But soon, she seemed to remember something. She sighed and said, Ms. Morris, that's all in the past. The beautiful woman's face darkened. Yes, it's all in the past. William suddenly spoke, it's not in the past. I'd been waiting for you to turn back. Ginny frowned and was about to speak when she heard a familiar voice. Yes, the beautiful memories of childhood are hard to forget. Ginny turned her head and saw Zane standing coldly outside. What are you doing here? Ginny stood up, a hint of panic in her eyes. Zane gave her a cold look and then turned to leave. He walked towards April's ward. Ginny hurried out, and when she saw Zane sitting next to April, her face turned grim. Then, she silently turned around. Zane saw her but didn't go after her. At that moment, Zane suddenly felt she was pathetic. William had already drugged her, yet she still came to see William and was chatting and laughing. What's wrong? April asked weakly. Zane shook his head and said, Nothing, just rest assured and stay in the hospital. Thank you. I can never repay your kindness in this lifetime. April said. Zane didn't speak, his gaze wandering, his thoughts drifting elsewhere. Ginny returned to the ward and sat on a chair in silence. William and the elegant woman exchanged glances, and the latter suddenly said, Today's society is really hard to understand. Young and unmarried, yet pregnant. You know, in our time, if this happened, let alone other strange looks, her parents would beat her to death. Ginny raised her eyelids and glanced at her, puzzled. Ms. Morris, why are you talking about this? The elegant woman said. It's nothing. When I went to get water for William just now, I heard a quarrel in the next ward. The girl wanted to keep the baby, but the man wanted to abort it. It moved me, so I mentioned it. Ginny, don't misunderstand, I didn't mean you. Ginny's face darkened slightly, and she immediately stood up and walked out. William and the elegant woman exchanged a glance, a smirk forming on their lips. As soon as Ginny walked out, she saw a doctor coming out of the adjacent ward. She stopped the doctor and asked, Doctor, what's the illness of the girl in this ward? Who are you to her? I can't disclose patient privacy, it's the regulation. Ginny took out 2 wads of cash from her bag and handed them over. She's my sister, I want to know. The doctor calmly accepted the money and said, Oh, if she's your sister, it's fine to tell you. She just had an abortion, and her body is very weak. As her sister, you must take good care of her during her recovery period, or she'll have lingering health issues. After speaking, the doctor didn't even glance at the stunned Ginny and quickly left. Ginny's eyes turned red. After a while, she took a deep breath and returned to William's ward, saying, Ms. Morris, there's something at the company, I need to go back first. All right. Ginny, you must be busy, go ahead. I'll take care of William here. The elegant woman said and then turned to leave. After she left, the doctor came in and said to the elegant woman, Ms. Morris, I've done what you asked. Millicent Morris smiled, took out 10 wads of cash from her bag, and handed them over, saying, Today's matter, you must not tell anyone. The doctor looked at the 10 wads of cash, a greedy glint in his eyes. Don't worry, this concerns my job. I wouldn't say a word. After taking the money, the doctor quickly left. Mom, you're amazing. You easily created a rift between them. William praised. Millicent snorted, If it weren't for that bastard having Faith Heron backing him, I would have tortured him to death for hitting my son. William nodded, a hint of confusion in his eyes. Normally, he should have died at home. How did he come out? However, he didn't tell his mother when he hired an assassin. Whether Zane is dead or not, the rift between them is real. From now on, Ginny is his. The splendid garden. Tiffany Smith was curled up on the sofa watching a drama. Suddenly, the door opened, and Tiffany looked up to see Ginny carrying bags into the room. She got up and walked over, surprised. Ginny, what's going on? Ginny said, I've packed my things. From now on, I'm staying here with you. Tiffany tilted her head and looked at Ginny. Her expression was calm, as if she had made some kind of resolution. What happened? As Ginny moved her things into the room, she calmly said, April Salazar is pregnant, with Zane's baby. When she said this, her tone was very flat, as if she were talking about someone else. Upon hearing this, Tiffany exploded, Damn it, those scumbags. Ginny, you stay here, I'm going out. With that, she ignored Ginny's attempt to stop her and turned to leave. Ginny opened her mouth, then started cleaning her room. Tiffany was definitely going to teach Zane a lesson, and Ginny didn't stop her. She also wanted to vent her anger. She had given up so many shares of the King Group for him, and he went and got someone else pregnant behind her back. How shameless. After tidying up the room, she curled up on the sofa, grabbed the leftover chips Tiffany had, and angrily stuffed them into her mouth, biting down hard. It was as if the chips were Zane. In the car, Zane looked helplessly at April. After her drip, she insisted on going home instead of staying in the hospital. Zane knew she was worried about money. After failing to persuade her, he had no choice but to let her go home. She lived in a very old neighborhood. The environment was very dirty. It was hard to imagine that in the bustling east side of the city, there could be such a filthy and chaotic neighborhood. April bent over and walked into the room with the support of Zane. Her home was a one-bedroom apartment. It was very small and had very little furniture. The living room only had a sofa, a bed, and a study desk. In front of the desk was a boy about 17 or 18 years old. When he saw April being helped in, his face changed slightly and he hurried over. "Sister, what happened to you?" Zane's gaze fell on him. He was very handsome and bore some resemblance to April. He should be April's younger brother, Ben Salazar, who was about to graduate from high school. "It's nothing, just an old problem." April didn't want her brother, who was about to take his college entrance exams, to worry about her. Ben looked at the bruises on April's face, and his expression turned ugly. "Was it that bastard asking you for money again?" April frowned and snapped, "He's your father." Ben shouted angrily, "Does he even act like a father?" "Sister, you've suffered too much for this family." As he spoke, tears rolled down Ben's cheeks. Seeing him cry, April felt that the recent hardships didn't seem so painful anymore. She tenderly wiped her brother's tears and said softly, "I am not suffering. As long as you're doing well, I am willing to do anything." Ben bit his lower lip, wiped away his tears, and helped Zane support April into her room. Then he poured her a cup of hot water and placed it on her bedside table. April was too tired and fell asleep shortly after. After she fell asleep, Zane and Ben walked out. Ben looked at Zane coldly and asked, "Are you her boyfriend?" Zane was just about to say no, but he saw Ben throwing a punch at him. The move was swift, but Zane easily intercepted it. "What are you doing?" Ben gritted his teeth and said, "If you are her boyfriend, how can you just watch her get beaten by that man?" Zane frowned and said, "When I went to her workplace, your father had already run away." "Bastard! Asshole!" Ben stomped his foot in anger, then took out an old phone and dialed a number. Soon, the call connected, and there were sounds of chaos in the background. Clack, clack, clack. The sound of mahjong tiles and dice shaking. It was clear he was in a gambling den. "What do you want, you little brat?" Ben said coldly, "Where are you? What does it have to do with you?" The man's voice on the other end was impatient. "I got a scholarship, but I can't find sister and mom. I want to give you the money so you can give it to them." Upon hearing this, Zane gave a thumbs up. This kid really knew his dad's character, hitting his soft spot with just one sentence. Sure enough, the noise on the other end paused, and then the man said, "I'm at the MyFish game room in the north of the city." Ben hung up the phone and looked coldly at Zane. "As my sister's boyfriend, shouldn't you avenge her?" Zane nodded. April's father was indeed a bastard. He not only tricked the money April gave him to gamble but also went to her workplace to cause trouble. If such a man wasn't taught a lesson, he would definitely continue to torment April in the future. Seeing Zane nod, Ben's cold expression softened a bit, and he said, "At least you're a man." After speaking, he took out his phone, found a group chat, and sent a message. "Meet downstairs at my house, we have something to do." Putting away his phone, he led Zane downstairs. He went to a nearby store and bought 2 bottles of water, handing one to Zane. About 10 minutes later, around 20 teenagers arrived on bicycles. They were clearly high school students, but their hair was dyed in various colors, and they were dressed like delinquents. Ben sat behind a burly teenager and then pointed to another bike owner nearby. "Chaz, he's my brother-in-law, you take him." "We're going together." "Got it, bro, hop on." Zane looked at this group, feeling a bit dumbfounded. He had heard from April that her brother was a good student and very obedient. But now, he seemed like a delinquent. Zane's mouth twitched. He knew young people could be reckless, so he just hoped they wouldn't actually beat his father to death. He got on the bike. This group of kids rode their bikes very fast, and in about 20 minutes, they arrived at a place called MyFish Game Room. Zane took a look inside and frowned. It looked like a game room, but there were bouncers, and those people were not ordinary thugs but real gangsters. "Zane, don't be afraid. Our 4C's gang from 3rd High School will protect you." Ben patted Zane on the shoulder, trying to comfort him. Zane felt both amused and helpless, but he understood why Ben looked down on him. After all, he was too skinny, as if a gust of wind could blow him over. "Thank you," Zane said, following Ben and his group inside. "Stop." A burly man walked over and blocked Ben. Ben was very arrogant and shouted, "I'm here to see Dirk Salazar." "Who are you to him?" "I'm his son." The burly man glanced at the group behind Ben and then said indifferently, "He's downstairs, go ahead, don't cause trouble." "Humph." Ben snorted coldly. He wasn't here to cause trouble, he was here to avenge his sister. Ben seemed to have been here many times before, and he quickly found the path leading downstairs. After going down, Zane's eyes began to flicker. This was no ordinary card room, it was a real casino. Chips, bunny girls. Dealers. Very professional. Around the room were brawny men, their eyes vigilantly watching the gamblers. Zane had heard from Mr. Six that every casino had cheaters watching the gamblers to prevent them from cheating. But the casino could cheat. Ben walked at the front and headed straight for a man in his 40s. On the way, he picked up a trash can and slammed it on the man's head. Dirk Salazar exclaimed, "Who is it?" Ben kicked him, making Dirk cry out and fall to the ground. The others rushed up, throwing whatever they could find at Dirk. Soon, Dirk's curses turned into screams. The scene happened so quickly that Zane didn't even have time to react. By the time he came to his senses, a burly man had grabbed Ben, and others had placed machetes to the necks of his classmates. The coldness of the machetes instantly calmed them down, and they stood still. Ben wasn't afraid of the machetes, he gritted his teeth and stared at the man who was getting up from the ground. Dirk took off the trash can from his head. Seeing it was Ben and his group, he angrily picked up an ashtray and smashed it on Ben's head. Ben didn't cry out in pain, he just stared at Dirk without blinking. "You little bastard, how dare you hit your father?" Ben gritted his teeth and said, "You beast, do you even deserve to be a father? What did you say?" Dirk was so angry that his whole body was trembling. He picked up the ashtray and was about to smash it on Ben's head again. Zane quickly walked over and grabbed his wrist. "That's enough. Who are you? What does it matter to you if I hit my son?" Zane punched him in the face. With a bang, Dirk screamed and flew sideways, crashing into the wall and rebounding to the ground. With that punch, Zane knocked out all his teeth. "Ow, he's going to kill me." Ben's eyes widened in disbelief as he looked at Zane. How could someone with such a skinny body have so much strength, enough to punch an adult several meters away? Zane glanced at the spot where Dirk had been sitting. There was a pile of chips, roughly worth tens of thousands. This guy was really rich. So much money, yet he didn't use it to treat his wife but spent it here instead. Thinking of April being unable to stand up due to pain, thinking of April going to sell herself to pay for her mother's medical bills, and ending up in this situation, anger surged in him. He grabbed a chair and started walking towards Dirk step by step. Dirk dared to hit Ben because Ben was his son. Towards others, he was a coward, a weakling. Seeing Zane approaching, he screamed in fear and, ignoring the pain on his face, tried to escape. But Zane was too quick. The chair smashed onto his back. With a bang, the chair shattered. Dirk screamed and lay motionless on the ground. Just as Zane was about to continue and vent April's anger, a cold voice came from behind. "Stop." Zane turned his head and saw a burly man making a cut on Ben's neck with a knife, blood flowing out. The burly man said coldly, "You can beat him up outside, but not here." "Mr. Joe, save me." Seeing someone speaking for him, Dirk crawled behind Mr. Joe, crying and sniffling. "They're going to kill me, help me kill them." Ben looked at Dirk with contempt. This beast only knew how to bully his wife, daughter, and son. In front of outsiders, he was as weak as a dog. No, even worse than a dog. Zane nodded, walked to Dirk, grabbed his hair, and started to drag him out. "Hold on." Mr. Joe said indifferently, "You hit someone here and want to leave just like that? How can I maintain my reputation in J City?" Zane frowned and asked, "What do you want?" "Simple, compensate for the damages at full price." Zane said indifferently, "Fine. And, kneel down, kowtow, apologize, and then get lost." Zane's eyes narrowed slightly. "So, you're planning to protect him? Who the hell do you think you are, talking to Mr. Joe like that?" Before Mr. Joe could speak, Dirk shouted loudly. Zane looked at him, and Dirk immediately shut his mouth, hiding behind Mr. Joe. Mr. Joe said calmly, "That's the rule. If I let you leave just like that, wouldn't any Tom, Dick, or Harry come here to cause trouble in the future? Zane replied, "This has nothing to do with me." Mr. Joe laughed. "Kid, you're the first one to dare speak to me like that in years." A cold glint flashed in Zane's eyes. At that moment, a voice suddenly rang out. "Mr. Joe, this is a misunderstanding." A young man walked in, his face full of smiles. It was none other than Zion Hall. Without him last time, Ginny might have been humiliated by William Mercer. Zane was also somewhat surprised to see him. "Zion?" Mr. Joe was a bit surprised to see him here and pointed at Zane. "You want to stand up for him?" Zion said, "It's not that I want to stand up for him." Mr. Joe grunted and said, "This is the north side, not your west side. You still have to follow my rules. These little punks came in here smashing things and hurting people, causing me so much loss. And if I let them go just like that, who would respect me in the future?" Zion said helplessly, "Mr. Joe, give me some face. If it were something else, I'd have to give you face, but this is a casino. The rules can't be broken." Zion glanced at the others. Ben seemed to realize where he was and his face turned pale, losing his previous arrogance. His classmates were also very scared but tried hard not to tremble. "Don't make it so complicated. Let them go, and I'll stay." Zane spoke up. "Zane, I'm not leaving." Ben shouted loudly. Mr. Joe glanced at Zane, then at Zion, and then raised his hand. The men simultaneously withdrew their knives. Led by Ben, they all ran over, surrounding Mr. Joe, Zane, and Zion. Mr. Joe shouted, "Get lost." Ben didn't move, looking at Zane with loyalty. Zane patted Ben's head, "Go outside first." "I'll be fine. Wait outside to take me back." "Zane, be obedient," Zane said sternly. Ben pointed at Mr. Joe and said, "If you let anything happen to my brother-in-law, I won't let you off." With that, Ben waved his hand and led his classmates out. "Ha, newborn calves aren't afraid of tigers." Mr. Joe didn't take them seriously and turned to Zane. "You don't need to kneel. Just apologize, and for Zion's sake, you can leave." Zane looked at Zion and asked, "Is this Wadsworth Bear's place? How dare you call Mr. Bear's name directly?" Mr. Joe's face darkened, and a murderous glint flashed in his eyes. Zane pulled over a chair and sat down, his murderous aura gradually spreading. "Zion, clear the place." Zion was stunned for a moment and said softly, "Mr. Soulsby, this is Wadsworth Bear's territory. With just one call, within 5 minutes, hundreds of people will be here. Do as I say." Zane said, looking up at Mr. Joe, "What are you to Wadsworth Bear?" Mr. Joe squinted his eyes. He wasn't stupid, he could tell from Zane's confidence and Zion's attitude that this wasn't an ordinary person. "Who are you?" Zane leaned in with a smile. "Wadsworth Bear has already put a black mark on me, and you don't even recognize me?" Hearing this, Mr. Joe's pupils contracted. "Clear the place." At his words, the men walked up to the onlookers and said, "There are some private matters today. You can take your chips and come back next time, sorry." "Okay, no problem. God, it's been a while since someone dared to challenge Mr. Bear's place. This kid's got guts." "This isn't guts, this is stupidity." The crowd kept discussing as they slowly left. It seemed many wanted to stay and watch the fun. Soon, only Zane, Zion, and Mr. Joe's group were left in the casino. Zane tilted his neck, a crisp cracking sound echoing. Before Mr. Joe could give any orders, Zane took the initiative, punching him in the nose. At the same time, he took off his jacket and threw it to Zion, then straddled Mr. Joe, punching him hard on the shoulder. "Ah!" Mr. Joe let out a chilling scream. As one of Wadsworth's enforcers, Mr. Joe had no power to fight back against Zane. In less than 3 seconds, Zane had broken all his limbs. The others snapped back to reality and rushed at Zane with machetes. Zane glanced back, picked up a chair, and threw it at Zion. Zion was startled and instinctively crouched down. With a bang, a sound came from behind him. Someone had tried to sneak attack and capture Zion. But that person was knocked out by Zane's chair. Zion breathed a sigh of relief, but the next moment his eyes widened. There weren't too many people here, but there were still over 30. And each one had a knife. However, these 30-plus men, all seasoned fighters, seemed like toys in front of Zane. With one punch, someone was sent flying. With one kick, someone collapsed and couldn't get up. In less than 5 minutes, the casino was in total disarray, and everyone, including Mr. Joe, was lying on the ground moaning. Zane walked over to Zion, picked up his clothes, and said to the conscious Mr. Joe, "Tell Wadsworth Bear this isn't over. As long as I'm alive, he'll never know peace." After finishing, he gave Zion a look and turned to walk upstairs. Ben saw Zane walking out unharmed and sighed in relief, admiring him secretly. He didn't know Zane's identity, but he understood Mr. Joe's. If Mr. Joe was letting him go, Zane must have a similar level of influence. "Zane, you." Zane ignored him and turned to Zion. "You know where all of Wadsworth Bear's places are, right?" Zion, still in shock, quickly nodded when he saw Zane frowning. "Mr. Soulsby, I know. Lead the way." Zion swallowed. "Mr. Soulsby, shouldn't we inform Mr. Six?" Zane said, "This small matter doesn't need him." After a pause, he continued, "But you can tell him to come and take over the territories." Zion understood. This tough guy planned to take down all of Wadsworth Bear's places today. For some reason, a surge of excitement filled him. "Mr. Soulsby, I'll go with you." "All right." Ben blinked, understanding a bit, and quickly said, "Zane, I'll go with you." Zane frowned. "You can't. Go back and take care of your sister." Ben got anxious and shouted, "Zane, I must go with you. Only by seeing the world can I protect my sister." Zane stared at him for a moment, then nodded. After all, there would be no danger with him around, so he might as well let Ben see the world. With Zion leading the way, they quickly arrived at Wadsworth Bear's second place, an arcade. Zane walked in, grabbed a chair, and smashed it on a gambling machine. Then Zion took out a knife and shouted, "Clear the place." Ben and the others imitated Zion, though they didn't have knives and instead picked up stools, shouting, "Clear the place." Seeing this, some people quickly left. Soon, a group of burly men came out. They glanced at Zane and then at Ben and the others in their school uniforms, nearly bursting with anger. "Damn it, even kids dare to come here." Before he could finish, Zane moved. Like a shadow, he appeared in front of him and kicked him in the chest. He screamed and was sent flying, smashing a fishing game machine. Then, Zane became like a wolf among sheep. Ben and the others were about to act but stopped, mouths agape, at the sight before them. In less than 5 minutes, Zane returned and said to Zion, "Next." In a club, Wadsworth Bear, wrapped in a towel, was being massaged by 2 sexy women. His phone rang. Wadsworth picked up the phone lazily. "Hello? Mr. Bear, big trouble. That Zane you blacklisted earlier, he's here. He's already taken down 30 of our places. Mr. Joe and the others had their limbs broken by him and are now heading to the next place." Wadsworth shivered and sat up straight, cursing, "What did you say? How did he do that? Mr. Bear, he's not human, he's a war god. Our brothers are no match for him. Impossible." Wadsworth's first reaction was disbelief. "Mr. Bear, it's true. He's heading to the next place now." Wadsworth's face turned red, and he roared through gritted teeth. "Why didn't you inform me sooner? Mr. Bear, he's too fast. Every place he goes, he takes everyone down in less than 5 minutes. I just got the news." Hearing this, Wadsworth dropped his phone, eyes vacant. He hurriedly picked it up and said, "Get everyone to the Noble Hotel. Stop him, whether with guns or whatever. I want to see him, dead or alive." After finishing, he smashed his phone on the ground. "Mr. Bear, what's wrong?" one of the women asked. Wadsworth kicked her in the head. She groaned, her head hitting a sharp object, blood flowing, lifeless. The other woman screamed in terror. "Shut up!" Wadsworth roared. The woman immediately covered her mouth, looking at Wadsworth in fear. Outside the Noble Hotel, many people stood, their expressions tense and faintly fearful. They had all heard about the ruthless man who single-handedly took down all of Wadsworth Bear's places. Suddenly, a car drove up. The door opened, and Zane got out, followed by Ben and Zion. Seeing Zane, the fear in their eyes deepened. Looking at the crowd, Zane was a bit disappointed. Was Wadsworth still not planning to show up? "Call Wadsworth Bear. I want to see him within 5 minutes," Zane said calmly. A man stepped out, trying to stay calm. "Mr. Soulsby, you've already taken down 37 of Mr. Bear's places. Can't you let go of whatever grudges you have?" Zane frowned and kicked him in the chest. 4 minutes left. The man stood up, covering his chest, and took out his phone to make a call. Shortly after, he put down the phone and said, "Mr. Bear will come." Zane nodded, took a cigarette from Zion's shirt pocket, lit it for himself, and leaned against the car to wait. About 2 minutes later, several cars drove up. Car doors opened, and dozens of men got out. Their waists were bulging, clearly carrying something. From an Audi A8, an elderly man stepped out. He moved slowly, but an imposing aura emanated from him. "Mr. Black." Everyone bowed in greeting. Zane's eyebrows raised slightly. The leader of the Five Lakes gang, Kent Black. The Five Lakes gang had been out of the spotlight for a long time, but unexpectedly, he showed up today. Mr. Black walked up to Zane, looked at the crowd in front of the Noble Hotel, and a hint of helplessness flashed in his eyes. He then said, "Young man, let it go. Go back." His tone was unquestionable. "Great, Mr. Black is here. The Noble Hotel is saved." Even though the Five Lakes gang doesn't seem as strong as Mr. Six on the surface, Mr. Black has been around longer and knows more people than Mr. Six. With Mr. Black stepping in, no matter how strong this guy is, he has to give Mr. Black some face. Listening to the crowd's discussions, Zane laughed and said, "Mr. Black, if it were anywhere else, I would definitely give you this face. But not with Wadsworth Bear. My grudge with him is unending." Mr. Black frowned and said in a deep voice, "No matter the reason, as long as I'm here today, I won't allow you to touch Wadsworth's people. After today, do as you wish. Why wait for another day? I want to deal with Wadsworth Bear today." Zane's eyes suddenly shot out a sharp light as he looked into Mr. Black's eyes and said word by word, "No matter who shows up today, this matter won't be settled peacefully." Mr. Black became angry and said coldly, "Young man, you're making an enemy of the entire underground world of J City." "Ha! Can you represent the entire underground world?" a voice echoed. From a nearby alley, Mr. Six led a group of people over, a mocking smile on his lips. Tristan Dunn. Seeing him, Mr. Black's face turned extremely grim. Mr. Six walked over, stood beside Zane, smiled at him with admiration in his eyes, and then turned to Mr. Black. "Mr. Black, you're getting old. It's time to retire. The underworld isn't your domain anymore. If you don't handle things well, losing face is a small matter, but losing your life isn't worth it." Mr. Black's eyes shot out two cold lights. "Are you threatening me?" Mr. Six shrugged, "I'm just stating the facts." "Tristan Dunn, who do you think you are, daring to speak to Mr. Black like that?" Another voice came. From the distance, another group of people approached. Leading them was a young man, seemingly under 30, with an ugly, rat-like appearance but an undeniable aura. Seeing him, Mr. Six's face became serious. "Godfrey Mock. Another big shot in the underground world. So lively." Zane muttered. All four big shots of J City's underground world were here. "Mr. Black." Godfrey Mock walked over and greeted Mr. Black respectfully. Mr. Black nodded and said to Mr. Six, "Even though the underworld isn't my domain anymore, my words still carry some weight." He then looked at Zane. "Young man, give me some face today and let it go. After today, I won't interfere in your feud with Wadsworth Bear." With these words, everyone's eyes turned to Zane, including Mr. Six. In the past, he could suppress the other three big shots, but together, he wasn't a match. Ben also looked at Zane with a tense expression. Any one of these people could have crushed him with a finger, but now, all four of J City's most infamous big shots were here, all because of Zane. This was too impressive. Ben now admired his brother-in-law, Zane Soulsby, greatly. Our Mr. Bear said that as long as Mr. Soulsby leaves today, Mr. Bear will personally apologize in the future, and the black notice will be cancelled by him personally. A man from the Noble Hotel said. Wadsworth Bear had already softened. Mr. Black was also persuading. Godfrey Mock didn't speak, but his attitude was clear. Whether to fight or make peace, he would follow Mr. Black's lead. "Mr. Six, what do you think?" Mr. Six keenly heard the words Mr. Six and immediately said, "If you want to fight, then fight. Whatever you do in the future, I'll follow. You don't need to ask my opinion, you make your own decisions." Mr. Six's words shocked everyone present. His personality had been known since he started in the underworld, reckless and fearless. Now, he was actually following Zane's lead? Mr. Black, being older and wiser, suddenly realized that helping Wadsworth Bear might not be a good idea. But having come this far, he had no choice but to stick to his guns. Zane glanced at them, their waists bulging with weapons. If it were just him, he wouldn't care about these people. But with Ben, Mr. Six, and his people around, if a fight broke out, things would escalate, and who knows how many would die. Zane took a deep breath and said, 3 days from now, at the Noble Hotel, I want to see Wadsworth Bear. I want him to kneel and apologize to me personally. After speaking, Zane turned and left. They didn't dare stop him, they even wished Zane would leave immediately. They all stepped aside to make way. Ben, with his head held high, followed closely behind Zane. Mr. Six's face darkened slightly as he glanced at the crowd. Zane's decision today had taken him by surprise. In his opinion, today was not the best time for a showdown. First, it was daytime. Although the area had been cleared, many people were likely still watching. Second, if a fight really broke out, he was unprepared, and there might be many casualties. Seeing Mr. Six also leave, everyone breathed a sigh of relief and then secretly mocked. Wanting Wadsworth Bear to kneel and apologize? Who does he think he is? As long as Wadsworth has time to prepare, today's events will never happen again. Mr. Black and Godfrey Mock exchanged a glance and walked into the Noble Hotel together. On the top floor, Wadsworth sat on the sofa with an ugly expression. Seeing the two, he quickly stood up and walked over with a smile plastered on his face. Thank you so much, Mr. Black and Mr. Mock. No big deal. The two waved their hands and sat down. Wadsworth, it's fine if you don't cause trouble, but when you do, why do you have to provoke such a reckless lunatic? Mr. Black scolded. We helped you solve today's issue, but what about 3 days from now? A flash of cold light appeared in Wadsworth's eyes as he said, Mr. Black, I'm very grateful for today's help, but the other party caught me off guard. I was unprepared. But next time, I'll be ready, and he won't get away with it. He paused and continued. Mr. Black, today's incident is a wake-up call. He can take down all my venues in 1 day, but he can also take down all your venues in 1 day. I know you've retired from the underworld. But with this guy's attitude, do you think he'll spare us? He looked at Godfrey sitting quietly on the side and continued. Even if he doesn't have that intent, what about Tristan Dunn? He's always wanted to become the top boss of the underground world in J City. Mr. Black frowned, knowing that Wadsworth was speaking the truth. However, he no longer liked fighting and killing and preferred peaceful solutions if possible. Mr. Black, although Wadsworth is trying to get us to stand together, he did say something true. Tristan Dunn has always wanted to be the top boss of the underground world in J City. Godfrey spoke, his eyes shining. Mr. Black's face darkened slightly. What do you mean? Godfrey said, that guy named Zane Soulsby is clearly not an ordinary person. An ordinary person, no matter how skilled, couldn't possibly take down dozens of people in such a short time. If my guess is correct, he should be one of those legendary metahumans. Metahuman. Mr. Black's face twitched, and a trace of fear flashed in his eyes. Back in his prime, he had encountered a metahuman. At that time, he knew well that metahumans were not people ordinary folks could mess with. He tried to recruit one, but the metahuman didn't think much of him, so he chose to retire. He washed his hands of the business. Unexpectedly, he got involved with a metahuman over a few $1 million. Seeing the fear on the faces of Mr. Black and Wadsworth, a hint of mockery flashed in Godfrey's eyes. He then said seriously, You two don't need to be afraid. Yes, he is a metahuman, but metahumans also have different levels. In my opinion, he should be a low-level metahuman, otherwise, he wouldn't be unknown in the metahuman community. Upon hearing this, the two were moved and immediately looked at Godfrey. Godfrey said, I know a powerful metahuman, but getting him to act won't be easy. The cost is something I can't bear alone. Wadsworth asked, How much? 150 million. Godfrey said. It may seem like we're hiring a metahuman, but in reality, he has an organization behind him. As long as we pay to hire him, taking care of a mere Zane Soulsby will be a piece of cake. He then looked at Wadsworth. This matter started because of you. What do you think? Wadsworth frowned. He's indeed the top boss in J City, but 150 million is too much. It's unavoidable. Godfrey said. To deal with a metahuman, we can only hire someone from their circle. Godfrey's lips curled into a smile. Of course, if you don't want to spend the money, that's fine. After all, this has nothing to do with me or Mr. Black. In 3 days, you can kneel and apologize, and you'll save some money. Wadsworth's face turned gloomy. After a while, he said, "Fine, I'll pay." Godfrey smiled slightly. "I'll introduce this person. After he kills Zane and Tristan, we'll split Tristan's territory among the 3 of us. Of course, the reason we're giving Mr. Black a share is because of his seniority, and without his help, we wouldn't be where we are today." Mr. Black glanced at Godfrey, a trace of satisfaction flashing in his eyes. "Never forget those who helped you, he's a good kid." Wadsworth gritted his teeth and nodded in agreement. Although 150 million was a lot, it would only take a few years to earn it back once they got Tristan's territory. After agreeing, Godfrey chuckled, stood up, and said, "I'll go back and make contact first. In 3 days, we'll gather everyone here." "No problem." Mr. Black responded cheerfully. Wadsworth stood up and extended his hand, "Looking forward to our cooperation." "Looking forward to our cooperation." Godfrey shook his hand, a hint of disdain flashing in his eyes. What an idiot. He provided the money, collaborated with that meta-human, and would later get Tristan's territory. He only needed to show up with people and got so many benefits. Godfrey thought he was incredibly smart. Zane was unaware of their discussion, but even if he knew, he wouldn't care. He was sitting in Mr. Six's car, and Mr. Six looked worried. "Zane, Wadsworth will never apologize." Zane nodded and said, "Whether he apologizes or not isn't up to him. And even if he does, I don't plan to let him off." "Then why wait for 3 days?" Zane replied, "It's daytime now, not suitable for large-scale conflicts. Besides, Wadsworth Bear is nothing but a clown in my eyes. But they have Kent Black and Godfrey Mock. The 3 of them together have over 1,000 subordinates. No matter how strong you are, you can't possibly." A cold light flashed in Zane's eyes. "In 3 days, if they don't interfere, we can mind our own business. If they do, they better be ready to leave the underworld." Seeing Zane's determination, Mr. Six didn't ask further. He drove Zane and Ben to April's building and then drove back to prepare. In 3 days, something big was going to happen. He needed to gather people. Zane stood downstairs at April's building and said to Ben, "Go upstairs and take care of your sister." "Zane, I'll go with you in 3 days." Zane patted his shoulder and smiled. "No need. Your task now is to study hard, not think about these things." "Zane." Zane interrupted him, "Taking care of your sister is helping me." Ben didn't say anything more. Watching Zane's departing figure, he clenched his fists tightly. One day, he would have the ability to help Zane. When Zane returned home, he quickly noticed that all of Ginny's belongings were gone. His brow furrowed, and a look of impatience flashed in his eyes. She had run away from home. He took out his phone and dialed her number. Shortly after, the call connected but was hung up by Ginny. Zane called twice more, but both times Ginny hung up. Zane, now irritated, threw his phone onto the sofa. He hadn't even confronted her about finding her idealized lover, William Mercer, and yet she had taken her things and left in a fit of anger. "Damn it!" Zane cursed. The next day, Zane opened his eyes, and a glint of divine light flashed in them. Hongjun Daozu. The scenes in his dream were becoming clearer, with more and more details. He even knew the name of the old man who spoke at the top, Hongjun Daozu. He was now sure that this wasn't a dream but possibly his own memory. Taking a deep breath, he extended his hand, and a ball of black flame danced in his palm as if it had a life of its own. With a clench of his fist, the flame vanished instantly. He took out his phone, and Ginny still hadn't returned his call. Zane was very angry. But he also got stubborn and didn't call her again or try to find her. He sat cross-legged on the floor, and many cultivation techniques appeared in his mind. 9 revolutions divine skill, 8-9 divine skill. Zane didn't like any of these techniques, and his heart told him they weren't suitable for him. With his eyes closed, Zane's body suddenly trembled. A cultivation technique appeared in his mind. The path of primordial unity. As soon as this technique appeared, Zane's heart started to beat faster. This technique seemed to be tailor-made for him. Without any hesitation, he began to cultivate. For some reason, the cultivation process was unusually smooth, as if he had practiced it before. He didn't know how long it had been, but his body suddenly trembled, and he opened his eyes, a glint of divine light flashing in them. Some previously vague memories were becoming clearer. However, there was still a lot he couldn't remember. The path of primordial unity didn't have any levels, only the stages of entry, minor achievement, major achievement, and perfection. He hadn't even reached the entry stage yet. But he felt extraordinarily powerful, even having a sense that he could crush 100 of his former selves with one hand. This seems to be my own cultivation technique, Zane muttered, taking out his phone and surprisingly discovering that 2 days had passed. Today was the third day he had agreed upon with Wadsworth Bear. Zane sighed. Time flies when cultivating. It felt like just a blink, and 2 days had passed. Just as he was sighing, his phone rang. The caller was Mr. Six. Zane answered the call, and Mr. Six's voice came through. Zane, everything is ready. When should we go? Now. Come pick me up. Okay. After hanging up the phone, Zane stretched his body, feeling incredibly strong, as if he could punch through a building. Zane made himself a bowl of noodles. After finishing his meal, Mr. Six arrived. Zane got into the car, and Mr. Six said with a serious expression, I've received news that Godfrey Mock, Kent Black, and Wadsworth Bear are mobilizing their forces. Their people are gathering near the Noble Hotel, numbering around 2,000. Zane frowned slightly. 2,000 people were indeed quite a lot. He was confident he could defeat 2,000 people, but if a fight really broke out, not to mention the consequences, even Thor Woods wouldn't let him off. After all, it would be too shocking. Even the Dragon Squad wouldn't be able to explain it to the higher-ups. Zane's eyes were deep and unreadable. Seeing this, Mr. Six said no more. Soon, the car arrived at the Noble Hotel. Zane got out of the car first and used his divine consciousness to scan the area. He saw many people hiding nearby. It wasn't just 2,000 people, it was nearly 3,000. He pursed his lips and walked in with Mr. Six. There was a man at the entrance who, upon seeing Zane walk in, had a mocking look in his eyes. In the past 2 days, the entire underground world had been talking about Zane. They said Zane was strong, skilled, and driven, even more so than Mr. Six had been. But when it came to Zane's intelligence, they all disparaged him. If he had taken a step back then, today's situation wouldn't have happened. Wanting Wadsworth Bear to kneel and apologize, who did he think he was? It wasn't hard to imagine that as soon as Zane walked into the Noble Hotel, he wouldn't be able to get out. Led by the man, they took the VIP elevator straight to the top floor. The upper floor was already crowded with people. Mr. Black sat in the center, with Godfrey Mock and Wadsworth Bear standing beside him. Zane had met Godfrey before but hadn't seen Wadsworth. But now, Zane recognized him at a glance. Zane walked over, but before he could speak, Kent said, Young man, I'm older and of a higher generation. Today, I'm in charge. You kneel and apologize, and this matter will be settled. Wadsworth said in a deep voice. You killed my son and disrupted so many of my operations. If it weren't for Mr. Black, you'd be dead by now, understand? Godfrey said calmly. A wise man knows when to give in. There's no need to lose your life over pride. Zane looked at the three of them and suddenly laughed. So, you're not planning to kneel and apologize? Wadsworth said with a hateful look, You killed my son, and you want me to apologize to you? Zane nodded slightly, then took off his coat. Since you're not planning to apologize, I'll beat you until you kneel and apologize. As Zane moved, everyone around them closed in. Mr. Six's shoulders shook, and 2 long knives appeared in his hands. He stared coldly at the group in front of him. Attack! Wadsworth said coldly. As soon as he spoke, everyone around them drew their machetes and charged at Zane. Zane's figure flickered, moving through the crowd like a ghost. The next moment, Zane appeared in front of Wadsworth. Then, the crowd looked horrified and all fell to the ground. Their knees were all shattered. Screams suddenly echoed on the rooftop. Endlessly.